How's it going, folks? Graham, GS, and Matthews here, back with another edition of WrestleRant for SummerSlam 1993. So I'm recording this at like 11 o'clock on Sunday, so I'm going to speed through this review. It wasn't a great show anyway, but still, I don't want to spend too much time on this review. I'm going to bed early tonight. I got a vacation throughout the next week, so I got to cut this down pretty briefly so I can head to bed. But anyway, like I said, if there's any review to be cut and short, it's this one. SummerSlam 93 was not nearly as good as SummerSlam 92 or some of the other SummerSlams I've reviewed up to this point. But kicking off the show, the Razor Ramon versus Ted DiBiase. A decent match, pretty much an enhancement match to kind of get over Razor Ramon, who I believe debuted in 93 that year. So not a bad match. It was okay for what it was, but the only thing I took away from this match was watching DiBiase come down to the ring and just me marking out, and it just served as a huge reminder as to how much I loved and still do love his entrance music, that classy money, 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 money theme, and that's awesome. But other than that, though, this match wasn't really anything to write home about. DiBiase, I don't think was with anybody at this point. The year before, or maybe in '91, I think he was facing Virgil at SummerSlam. He wasn't with Virgil here. He didn't have the $1 million, Money Inc. yet. I think that was the year prior, '92. Wasn't in Money Inc. He didn't have the $1 million corporation yet, so he was just kind of flying solo, and people didn't really give him that much of a reaction. He kind of cooled off as a heel in his final few years with WWE, but still a nice little way of kicking off the show. A nice win for Razor Ramon, but not much more than that. Up next, the WWF Tag Team titles. Decent match here. Steiner brothers, Rick and Scott Steiner, defending the WWF Tag Team titles against the Heavenly Bodies, Jimmy Del Rey and Tom Pritchard. Not as good as some of the other tag team matches I've seen, not only at SummerSlam, but I've talked about it, very openly here in the past when I review pay-per-views rather, from the 80s, most notably the WrestleManias or the early 90s, whatever. Their tag team division in that period in time, you don't need me to tell you this, was so stacked, though. They had so much talent. And the Steiner brothers will probably should go down as one of the greatest tag teams of all time for all the work they did in WWF and in WCW on the territories, whatever. And I'm surprised, given the way that Scott Steiner is in 2015, I guess I'm not really surprised they're not already in the WWE Hall of Fame, but it would be cool to see them get inducted at some point. If you can get the Bushwhackers in there, who I love, I think they're great, fun characters and whatever, but if they can get in the WWE Hall of Fame, I see no reason why the Steiners shouldn't be in there either. But this match was mostly just kind of a showcase for them. I think they interviewed their mom and sister or something before the match, which was kind of weird, or maybe it was after, I don't know. Todd Pettengill in the crowd interviewing them in the audience. So that was interesting. Nice little match. I didn't really see much in the Heavenly Bodies, but it didn't bother me or anything, the match, that is, but it didn't really kind of amount to the same great matches we've seen from, same great tag team matches we've seen in past SummerSlam events in this time period as a whole. Up next, the first good and one of the only really good matches on the show. And, in comparison to the past IC title matches, it wasn't even really that great. Shawn Michaels defending the Intercontinental Championship against the babyface Mr. Perfect. I didn't know he spent that much time as a babyface in WWE. I guess he did, though, but he was pretty over here. It was a good match. I enjoyed it. I thought I would enjoy it. I would enjoy it as more than I did. Anyway, it was a good match, but I think what kind of hindered it was having those matches from a year prior, from years prior, especially the year prior before this, the year before this, the main event for the Intercontinental Championship. This was third on the freaking card. The year before in England, you had Jesus Christ, why am I blanking here? You had Bret Hart versus British Bulldog for the Intercontinental Championship in the main event of SummerSlam 92. One of the greatest matches, not only in SummerSlam history, but in WWE history. And then a year later, you have two great talents in Shawn Michaels and Mr. Perfect, one going on to be one of the biggest faces this company has ever seen in the last 20, 30 years. But, it felt hindered. I feel like they would have had better matches down the line. You had some interference with Diesel at ringside, later known as Kevin Nash, of course, and costing Mr. Perfect the match. And he didn't even pin Perfect. He won via countout, so Michaels retained the title, but it was kind of a fluky finish. I know that was kind of par for the course, and at this period in time, the late 80s and the early 90s. And, but people talk about the bullshit finishes today with the roll-ups, and, obviously don't get many roll-ups back then, but you probably got more countouts and disqualification finishes back then than you do now, and even on pay-per-view. If that was to happen this day and age, unless it's really necessary, I'm not a fan of doing DQ finishes or countout finishes, because the pay-per-view is supposed to be the be-all, end-all of a feud, unless they want to keep it going to like WrestleMania or something. But I don't believe Michaels and Mr. Perfect had another pay-per-view match after this, unless I'm wrong. I have no idea. I believe Michaels faced Bret Hart at was it, maybe it was 92 Survivor Series. Maybe I'm making shit up here. I think it was 92 where he faced Bret Hart for the WWE Championship. And I'm not mixing that up with the Montreal Screwjob, by the way. There actually was a pay-per-view. I believe it was either 92 or 93. Maybe it was 94. It was one of those years where Hart faced Michaels for the WWE Championship, pre-Montreal Screwjob, years before that. What was I getting to, though? But yeah, especially this period in time when you did not have many pay-per-views. This was before the whole in-your-house shows and stuff like that. You only had WrestleMania, SummerSlam, Survivor Series, and Royal Rumble. So to do, and especially in a big match like this, and maybe if you wanted to do it in Ramon versus DiBiase, or in like the Jerry Hart Lawler Bret Hart match, which I'll get to in a minute, I kind of got, it wasn't a huge feud. But for an Intercontinental title match, it left a little bit to be desired. So I wasn't, I'll get to the main event in a little while. That was that was comical. But that was kind of the par for the course on the show for whatever reason. But wasn't really a fan of the finish. It protected perfect. I thought it was a good match. Not an amazing match, but very good for what it was, considering who was involved. But yeah, like I said, I enjoyed it, but it could have been, the finish left a little bit to be desired. Up next, we had IRS taking on the 1-2-3 Kid, later known as Sean Waltman, later known as X-Pac. So this was his premier year in WWE, actually his premier pay-per-view, as he mentioned in a backstage interview before this matchup, and he didn't win, I guess they might have been doing, unless they were doing like the whole underdog character with him, which they were. I mean, that's how he won that match against Razor Ramon on Raw that one time in 1993. So I guess that's what they were kind of doing. But in his pay-per-view debut, you can't, have him beat a guy like IRS, who's a notable name, mind you, but he was never really a huge name. He was never a Hulk Hogan or a Bret Hart or an Undertaker or something. He's IRS. He puts other people over. So I was surprised to see him win, and especially for a match that got 5 or 6 minutes. Maybe, I guess, because 1-2-3 Kid wasn't like he was in a majority of the match, or in control for a majority of the match. He got in a decent amount of offense. It wasn't like he was buried here, but the finish of the match was also, much like the previous one, just kind of more so confusing. I don't know why they would have 1-2-3 Kid. I guess, like I said, if they wanted to get over the underdog character, I understand that. Maybe he loses more matches than he wins. But in his first ever pay-per-view against the guy who could take a loss very easily in IRS, it's kind of a weird decision. But the match was, I thought 1-2-3 Kid was going to win, so the finish kind of overshadowed a majority of the match for me anyway. Up next, we had the whole dilemma with Bret Hart and Jerry Lawler. They were going to go one-on-one in the show. Bret Hart that year had won the King of the Ring tournament. Jerry Lawler obviously taking exception to that and saying that he was the true king of WWE, leading to this match at SummerSlam. But before the match, Jerry Lawler said he had a broken leg or broken foot or something, preventing him from competing, doing the whole bait and switch. And out came Bret Hart's opponent instead, Doink the Clown. So this was odd. This was also Matt Bourne. This was Matt Bourne's, I believe that was Matt Bourne underneath the Doink makeup and costume. I don't think Matt Bourne left WWE until later on that year. Doesn't really matter, though. For a match that went 9 minutes, you couldn't have given the match less time. For a match that, went 9 minutes, you couldn't deliver a straightforward finish. They had the match end in disqualification. It's not like a win over Doink the Clown would have benefited Bret Hart any, but for a match to go that long, for a match that no one cared about, and Bret Hart versus Doink the Clown of all characters, and then to have it end in DQ was mind-boggling. And then afterwards, out comes Jack Tunney, who says, Jerry Lawler was the one who caused the disqualification. He came out to the ring and it started attacking Bret Hart, giving him the disqualification victory. And out comes Jack Tunney saying that if you don't wrestle right now, Jerry Lawler, you'll either be fired or I forgot what the consequences were. But Jerry, gets in the ring and they do the match. And this match went even shorter than the Bret Hart and Doink the Clown match. Like I said, if they were saving it for a later date, I get that. But for a time when they had so few pay-per-views, and I know they did the whole, Jerry Lawler and Bret Hart's, I think they dragged it out until Survivor Series, and they did the whole, the Dink, the Doink, or maybe that wasn't that year. I don't know what year that was. But still, that was a little weird. And they did deliver on the match, kind of. Bret Hart did win via disqualification, or he won the match originally with the sharpshooter, and because he didn't let go of the hold, the referee, nowadays the same thing happens, from time to time, not all the time, but they'll have one of the baby faces, or the heels rather, it doesn't really matter. They'll lock in their submission hold and keep it in for so long that the referee reverses the decision and thus disqualifies them and gives the win to the other person. So in this case, the same thing happened. Bret Hart had the sharpshooter locked in on Jerry Lawler after he won the match, but it wasn't like he didn't break the hold after a count of 5 or a minute or two. He had it locked in for at least 5 minutes. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but that's certainly what it felt like. And it took like 30 referees to get him off. Like, that was comical. You couldn't have 1 or 2 guys take Bret Hart off of Jerry Lawler. They literally had like 10 guys in the ring trying to pull Bret Hart off of Jerry Lawler, and it took forever for them to reverse the decision. So again, like I said before, for a match that went that long with so much time devoted to one angle, you couldn't just wait and stop wasting time with the predictable outcome, or at least deliver a clean finish. I thought that was so stupid, and it wasn't a complete waste of time, but just the DQ finishes back to back, and the match not really being anything too special. I know it was a grudge match. You could have just blown it over here. It wasn't like the greatest feud in the world anyway. It was, Jerry Lawler was still credible at that period in time. He isn't what he is today. That goes without saying. But still, I think the feud just could have easily just been blown off here and wouldn't have mattered much at all. But yeah, just with so much time devoted to one angle, just deliver a clean finish, or at least if you're going to do the whole reverse of the decision afterwards and give Jerry Lawler the DQ win, you could do it up. They could have done this whole thing in like minus 10 minutes and given some more time to the tag team title match, to the IC title match, to a few of the other matches later on in the show. It just felt like time wasted to me for whatever reason. Up next, we had Ludvig Borga. I apologize if I mispronounced that. Taking on Marty Jannetty, and again, it's kind of funny, almost exactly similar to the opener between Ramon and DiBiase. The only real thing that I got, that my biggest takeaway from this match was the entrance music of Marty Jannetty. I've heard the Rockers music before. I haven't watched many pay-per-views from the late 80s and early 90s. Just a handful, from the WrestleManias to these pay-per-views, Royal Rumbles, whatever. And I've heard, like I said, I've heard the Rockers theme, many times before, but just for whatever reason on this show, when I heard him come out to that theme, it got me, it stuck with me. I don't know why. The same thing happened recently with Cesaro's theme. I thought that was shit when I first heard it, but all these months later, it's really starting to stick to me. I love the Rockers theme, and I watched it on YouTube right afterwards. It's a very catchy tune. That was the only big takeaway from this match. Ludvig Borga, before the match, was cutting an interview, cutting a promo on Lex Luger and him being a disgrace to America. He was outside in some city, I think of Detroit. Of course, Detroit, of all places. Why am I not surprised? Some hellhole of a place saying, "Oh, this you must have skipped this stop on your U.S. Express, your Luger Express," or whatever it was called, Mr. Lex Luger, and all this other bullshit. They were obviously setting up him versus Luger in a match, Luger and Borga, in a match down the line, which maybe it came to fruition. I don't know. I don't really care. That character obviously did not last long if I knew nothing about him before this pay-per-view, and he confronted him after Luger's match later on in the main event, which I'll get to in a minute, and he confronted him backstage, and he didn't even win the championship, so I don't know what the point of that was. But yeah, is a very one-dimensional evil foreigner character that didn't really have much to it. He didn't do anything in this match to excite me. An easy win for the guy against Marty Jannetty, but like I said, the biggest takeaway from this, for whatever reason, was me just getting addicted to the Rockers theme. Just a great tune. Sometimes the most basic tunes are the best ones. Take my word for that. Up next, we have The Undertaker. You're talking about shitfests. You have The Undertaker versus Giant Gonzalez in a rest and peace match. This was easily one of the worst feuds in WWE history. And it's so weird that Undertaker is a very rare case of a wrestler who gets better with age. He's like a fine wine. I know that's cliche's been used to death. But with Undertaker, it's a perfect comparison. The guy's matches were such shit, for the most part, early on in his WWE career, and he came on to have such classics in the 2000s, not even the early 2000s, because I'm not forgetting the matches with Heidenreich and all the other garbage wrestlers that he faced in the first few years of the 2000s, but maybe late 05 in his matches with Orton and Batista, Edge, all these other guys, Shawn Michaels, don't even get me started, but early on in his career, this was a prime example. No one gave two shits about this feud. Giant Gonzalez, an impressive specimen of a human being, I'll grant him that, but a dude that dresses up with the sprayed on abs, and it just screamed gimmicky. It screamed just stupidity. It screamed asinine, So I hated their match at WrestleMania. I thought this was a poop fest too, and thankfully it only lasted. It could have been a lot shorter. At 8 minutes, it could have been a minute, I would not have complained one bit. But it went on a lot longer than it should have. Undertaker won, God save us all. And that was it. Thankfully, that was the end of the feud. That was the last we saw Giant Gonzalez in WWE. He was never back again, I don't think. God bless his soul. I believe he passed away about 5 years ago or so. But this feud, this whole thing was total crap. It was total poop. And I just did not like really. I was, very fearful coming into this pay-per-view because I know a majority of the pay-per-view was all about Lex Luger. This whole pay-per-view was pro-USA. They had the Star Spangled Banner and the vignettes and the video packages and the US Express. And not the US Express. What the fuck was it called? The Luger Express? Not the Luger Express. I don't even know. But whatever it was, I know it's such an easy thing to remember. I don't know why I'm not thinking of it right now, though. But anyway, oh my god. But anyway, though, I was so fearful coming into this pay-per-view because I knew this match was going to take place at SummerSlam between Taker and Gonzalez. It's such a poop fest. I hated the match at WrestleMania. This was even worse. Oh my god. Let's please move along. Tatanka and the Smoking Guns versus Bam Bam Bigelow. I'm sorry. I'm just thinking of the poop fest that was Taker versus Gonzalez. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'll try to compose myself. 6-man tag team action. Tatanka and the Smoking Guns versus Bam Bam Bigelow and the Head Shrinkers. A pretty fun 6-man tag team match. For what it was, again, nothing special. Tatanka was Tatanka, the Smoking Guns. It's just seeing Billy Gunn out there, years before he became Badass Billy Gunn or Mr. Ass or whatever, however you remember him as. The guy is one of the coaches on Tough Enough over 20 years later. Just amazing to me. That was the only real thing that was the biggest takeaway from this match. Bam Bam Bigelow was always good too. The Head Shrinkers, one of them, fought too. Later go on to be... of course, Rikishi in WWE, WWF, whatever. It was a good match. Nothing too special. Just kind of a buffer between... I'm not even going to mention that, but between the previous match, so I don't have to mention it again, in the main event. So it served that purpose. Nothing really special other than that. And then we get to the main event. Lex Luger contending for the WWE Championship against Yokozuna. In the whole US Express. I'm going to look it up right now because I'm probably pissing a lot of people off by continuing to say by saying the US Express. And I know it's something else. I'm just going to look it up right now. Google is your friend, people. Google. I almost said Luger because Luger is what we're talking about. Google is your friend. I don't know about Lex Luger, but Google certainly is. I'm going to look this up right now. I want to say it's the US Express, and I've heard it like a million times over, so I don't know why I wouldn't know what it is. The All-American, let's see. What the fuck was it called? Jesus, I'm trying to look for it right now. Like I said, I feel like it's the US Express, but it's not. Oh my god, I'm sorry. You can probably skip ahead a few minutes. The Lex Express. I'm sorry, that's where you go. The Lex Express tour. The US Express was some tag team, I think. I don't even know. I'm just completely out of it. It's 11 o'clock on a Sunday. I'm sorry. I just gotta work. I'm leaving tomorrow for vacation. I'm just done. But the whole Lex Express thing, going in this pay-per-view, doing the whole world tour across the United States, rallying up the people. And Lex Luger is a prime example of a guy that you can attach the American flag to, and that's the only thing that's going to get him over. He was not a great worker. He was okay. He wasn't terrible, but he just really didn't have it, and just the times that I've been exposed to him from 93 and 94, the guy went from main events, and one of the main events anyway, not the main event, but one of the main events of WrestleMania 10 with Yokozuna in a rematch from this pay-per-view. And the next year, he was in a tag team match. And I know that's always, it's sometimes the case with guys like The Miz or a Daniel Bryan or whatever. One year you're main eventing, the next year you're opening the show. I get that. But in this case anyway, Lex Luger was a guy they pushed for a cup of coffee in 1993. And it wasn't Lex Luger that was over. And it's not like Daniel Bryan at all. Daniel Bryan got over. Yes, the yes chants were amazing and all. But people chanted, at the end of the day, they chanted Daniel Bryan. Lex Luger, I didn't hear one Luger chant on this show. Maybe I'm deaf. Maybe I'm missing something. But all I heard were USA chants, which was great. By WWE's, booking of this, it's a great move to make. Yokozuna was the evil heel foreigner champion. Not the first time they did it, but they've already done it a couple times before this point. Prior to this point. So I understand why they did it. It garnered up a lot of interest in this matchup. People were raving all about it after Lex Luger, body slammed Yokozuna on the USS or whatever it was, one of the boats. I completely forgot. I know the moments, I just can't remember them point by point. My memory does not serve me correctly all of the time, but that happened in July. So they had a lot of buzz going into this match, and the match really wasn't really that good. Like I said, Lex Luger, it was not a great wrestler. I mean, what I vouch him for a WWE Hall of Fame induction? Maybe. I don't know about that. I mean, I've said it before, but, maybe at the bottom of the barrel at some point, but right now, probably not. The guy didn't win any world championships. I don't know if he won many championships at all in WWE. I know he held the tag team titles at one point, I think. I don't think he was ever Intercontinental champion, but he was a prime example of a guy that was just a flash in the pan. And I know you could say that about guys like Ultimate Warrior, but he sustained his popularity from the time he, was shot up in a superstardom in 1988 up until he left in 92. He was still one of the most over guys in the entire company. Lex Luger was popular for all of a couple months, and it wasn't because of him. It wasn't because of anything that he did. It was because of the way that he was being promoted as the face of USA, as the all-American guy. It's because of the colors he was wearing, not because of who he was. He's a good talent. He's not terrible, and I understood why they did it, but he was not the right guy to do it. I don't think he really had that connection with the crowd without the U.S. stuff, because like I said, it really went to show about a year later at WrestleMania in a match that no one cared then. No one cared about this. I mean, everyone cared about the match and the build-up, but the match wasn't really that good. For a match that went almost 18 minutes, very rarely do I see matches go so long, but I see so little. It wasn't a bad match, but it was like, eh. And then the finish was the worst part. It was probably the most comical part of this entire show, other than that rest in peace match, that joke of a match. You have Lex Luger knock down Yokozuna, which is a huge freaking deal. Bobby Heenan and Mr. McMahon, who I've always hated on commentary. I thought he sucked for the 1990s or whenever he was on commentary in the early 90s, late 80s. I hated Mr. McMahon on commentary. People complain about Michael Cole all the time. He's like 10 times worse. He was like the goofy Michael Cole of the 1990s, and he has the gall to yell in their ears every Monday night on commentary. But I digress. They're making a huge deal about Yokozuna being off his feet. Lex Luger's, he's taking him off his feet. He's got the advantage, and Yokozuna's out at ringside, and it grants him the count-out win. So cool, he gets a count-out win, but he doesn't win the championship. But you would think that this guy just won the fucking Super Bowl. They have all the confetti come down. The people are kind of going crazy because Lex Luger's going crazy. They have all the wrestlers come down, put him above their shoulders, going, yeah, this is great. Lex Luger wins. But you didn't win the WWF Championship, you goof. That was so stupid. And they never really ended up giving him that championship win. And I guess from what I've heard from various sources over the years and stuff, that maybe the original plan was to put the belt on him on this pay-per-view. And if they were going to, it had to be on this show. Yokozuna went on to hold that belt up until WrestleMania months later, about 6 or 7 or 8 months later, and they did the rematch there. They did the whole Royal Rumble thing with Bret Hart and Lex Luger, and I'll get to that in a second, but maybe the original plan was to put the belt on him in this pay-per-view, and they wanted to protect him, so they had him win. The celebration stuff should not have happened. I get why they probably wanted the whole celebration stuff, because they already scheduled it, they already kind of penciled it in. They still wanted to do it, so hey, we'll give him the count-out win, we'll celebrate anyway, which makes no sense, because he did not win the championship. Never would he win the championship in WWE. But anyway, I guess, because they thought he wasn't ready yet. Maybe by next year we'll give him the championship at WrestleMania, but hey, let's go into the Royal Rumble. We'll give the Royal Rumble win to both Lex Luger and Bret Hart, and we'll make it a draw. And whoever the most over is, we'll give them both championship shots at WrestleMania, because there weren't really many triple threats, if any, around this period in time in WWE, much less wrestling. We'll do the whole draw at the Royal Rumble, give them both title shots. Whoever's the most over by WrestleMania, we'll give them the championship at the pay-per-view. And ultimately, it was Bret Hart. So if there was ever a time to put that championship on Lex Luger, if they really wanted to, it was on this show. Should they have? That's up for debate. I personally say I don't think so, because like I said, this whole the Lex Express thing, it had mileage. It had very short mileage, no pun intended. It had a very short shelf life, because the guy was back to being just another guy on the roster. by 1994. So it's probably for the better that it worked out that way. Just the ending of this pay-per-view is infamously known as being one of the most goofiest and stupidest ways to close the show. Sure, everyone's happy and celebrating, but he didn't win the championship, so it was stupid. And Yokozuna sold the attack, sold the bump like $1 million. They had I think they announced Lex Luger as the winner. They have everyone come down celebrating, putting him on his shoulders and stuff. And then they go to a video package for like 3 or 4 minutes, set to some song, I have no idea what it was, of the Lex Express and him going to children's hospitals and stuff. They're interviewing people, I forgot to mention this, throughout the night, saying, who do you think's going to win this match? Blah, 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 blah. And that's cool and all. That's great. They wanted to paint him as this hero of the country, of the United States. But to me, it was very John Cena-esque, but, the character anyway. But the biggest difference between John Cena and the Lex Luger character is that you're not going to hear John Cena come out every Monday night and talk about the charities that he does. Sure, he'll do a charity thing every once in a while on Monday Night Raw, but he'll never come out and say, I'm great, I'm so popular because I do the charities, I do it for the kids. He'll sometimes say, hustle, loyalty, and respect. He'll point to some kid in the crowd who may have had a disease or cancer or whatever, rise above cancer. That's great. But they're not saying every single week you should cheer John Cena because he does all that stuff. That would make people even more sick of him. I think it's one of the things that makes John Cena, what makes me respect him as much as I do, is because he doesn't, boast about the stuff that he does. They were boasting everything about what Lex Luger was doing that summer. They were like, he went to all these children's hospitals. It brought a smile to the kids' faces to see Lex Luger. I'm sure it did, Lex Luger, that big star that he was, maybe for those 2 months in 1993, but it just felt forced. The whole thing just felt forced. And I'm glad it got over. Great for him. But it was obvious that it had a very short shelf life, and I'm not surprised he was back to being a nobody a year or two down the line. So I'm glad it was Bret Hart who ended up winning the championship at WrestleMania, but this pay-per-view was just so goofy. But like I was saying before, though, they went to some video package, they come back, Yokozuna is still selling the attack at ringside. He is still selling the attack for the bump anyway, from Lex Luger, and he's still out at ringside. They're having Mr. Fuji and Jim Cornette attend to him, and Lex Luger's backstage, and he's celebrating, and like I said before, Ludvig Borga comes up to him and challenges him to a match, and all this other crap they're teasing, which maybe it did come to fruition on a house show, but no one cared. By that point, he wasn't going to win the championship, so the whole feud between Lex Luger and Ludvig Borga was kind of a complete waste of time. But that was the way they went off the show. A count-out win in your main event, ladies and gentlemen, for the WWE Championship. Oh, this show wasn't good. I said earlier that it wasn't a bad show, but in retrospect, it kind of was. I didn't really enjoy this show at all. Maybe it's just because it came 1 year after the amazing 92 show. I love that show so much. I love the WWE title match. I love the main event for the IC title. This show really did not have many redeeming qualities, if any at all. I thought the Michaels and Perfect match was good. The finish was kind of stupid, so if you count that down as a low point, then everything else in the show is kind of a low point. Razor Ramon to DiBiase served a purpose, but it's nothing you should go out of your way to see. Same thing with Ludvig Borga and Marty Jannetty, but other than the theme song thing that I mentioned before, tag team title match, fine for what it was, but yet unspectacular. IC title match I already talked about. IRS and 1-2-3 Kid kind of felt, why did IRS go over? That was kind of a weird decision to make. The Bret Hart and Jerry Lawler and Doink the Clown thing felt like time filler. Complete time killer to me. Not in a good way. Undertaker and John Gonzalez. We get to the main event. I'm not even going to talk about it. I already spoke my piece, no pun intended, on Taker Gonzalez. 6-man tag team match was fine. The main event I already talked about too. It was just weird. For all that hype, it did not live up to the expectations that everyone had set for it going into this pay-per-view. So overall, not a good show at all. Skip this pay-per-view. SummerSlam 1993 was not a good show. Was it a bad year for wrestling? I don't think so. We had WrestleMania 9 was not good. That show sucked. So maybe it was a bad year for wrestling. We had the debut of Raw that year. So there was that. But still, this pay-per-view is not one. In your many SummerSlam viewings, like I've talked about, that's the whole reason why I'm doing WrestleRant. I've had people leave comments in the past, tweet me on Twitter, talk about how, these WrestleRant videos are what get them to watch the old pay-per-views again. Whether they were pay-per-views they haven't watched in years since they were a kid, or they just want to watch them for the first time. And I appreciate that. That's kind of the whole reason, other than me wanting to kind of broaden my knowledge of the product and history of the business. but for other people to kind of do the same thing. I encourage that. I think it's great when other people, tell me that. I get a lot of enjoyment. It brings a smile to my face when people tell me that these reviews and stuff encourage them to go back and watch older content. I think it's great. But this pay-per-view is one you should skip. I would strongly recommend, going against watching this pay-per-view. There's no redeemable qualities other than the IC title match, but even then, the IC title match from the year prior was a lot better than this one. So, of a show, don't watch it on the WWE Network. Stick around next week, or today's Tuesday. Like I said, I'm reviewing this on Sunday, but I'm putting this up on Tuesday. On Saturday, if all goes well, I'll be on vacation this week, but if I can watch the SummerSlam 94 show, get a review up in time for Saturday, I'll be reviewing SummerSlam 1994. Hopefully we can, fingers crossed that show is a lot better than this one. This was not a good show. But I did have fun reviewing it, though, so I appreciate that. But in the meantime, and in between time, you guys can catch me on Twitter at WrestleRant. Find me on Facebook at facebook.com/graham.gsm.matthews. Be sure to share, like, comment, and subscribe. All support is greatly appreciated. Have an awesome week, folks, and I'll catch you folks down the road.